In the quiet glow of twilight, long shadows stretched across the polished floor of the living room. The only sound breaking the stillness was the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock on the wall, marking the passage of time into the evening. Sarah, her hands warmed by a porcelain teacup, awaited the return of her only son, Ken. Today was a momentous day. Ken was to formally propose to his fiancée, Eleanor, in front of her parents. At 28, Ken's bright future filled Sarah with an expectant joy she had long yearned for. Presently, the soft click of the front door opening echoed through the house. "Welcome home, dear. How did it go?" Sarah called out, her voice barely containing her excitement as she peered from the kitchen. Her gaze fell upon Ken, who, with his head bowed, slowly and wearily removed his shoes. The aura emanating from his hunched back was far from the happiness Sarah had anticipated. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of despair. A chill, like cold fingertips, traced its way down her spine, a premonition of dread. "Ken?" Sarah stepped into the living room, her voice soft with concern. Ken slowly lifted his head. The sight made Sarah gasp, nearly dropping her teacup. She clutched it tighter, the warmth bringing her back to reality. Ken's left cheek was hideously swollen and crimson, and at its center, a distinct handprint, as if burned into his skin, stood out starkly. She felt the blood drain from her face, her fingertips growing cold, her heart a frozen lump in her chest. "What happened to your cheek? Was it an accident?" she stammered, her voice trembling. Ken shook his head weakly, his lips pressed together, his eyes wide with a suppressed pain. He looked not like the strong adult he was, but like a wounded child returning home. Sarah's chest ached as she waited for him to speak. "Mom, Eleanor's mother. She hit me today," he choked out, his voice a strained whisper. Ken sank onto the living room sofa, his cheek trembling uncontrollably. "Hit you?" The unbelievable words echoed in Sarah's mind. "Why? What happened? Please, tell me," she urged, forcing her voice to remain calm. She couldn't afford to show her distress. She was his last refuge, and he needed her strength. Ken covered his face with his hands, struggling to suppress a sob as he began to recount the events in broken sentences. "They're completely against our marriage." When I asked why, she said. Ken paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath. With a look of utter despair, he uttered words that tore at Sarah's heart. "You're only after her money, aren't you? A pauper from a single-parent home, trying to ensnare our daughter." A pauper from a single-parent home. The words were like sharp shards of glass, piercing Sarah's eardrums and shredding the softest parts of her heart. For 20-odd years since her husband passed, she had lived for her son's future alone. She rose before anyone else and worked later than anyone else, pushing herself relentlessly to ensure he never felt the sting of poverty. Now, all those years of blood, sweat, and tears felt defiled, trampled underfoot. The teacup in her hand creaked, protesting her grip. "And you just stood there and let yourself be hit?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with an edge. Ken bit his lip, offering no reply. His silence spoke volumes of his powerlessness. But Ken's next words fueled the fire of Sarah's anger even more. "I'm sorry, Mom. I couldn't say anything back. But it wasn't just that. She insulted you too." A tear traced a path down Ken's cheek. She said, "Your mother probably only got to be a director by charming men in some shady business, didn't she?" She laughed as she said those cruel words, right in front of me. At that moment, all emotion drained from Sarah's face. Beyond sorrow, beyond surprise, even beyond anger, a look of absolute zero-degree impassivity dominated her beautiful features. Something within her snapped with a resounding crack, and something entirely different began to stir, silently awakening. Sarah rose wordlessly and walked into the kitchen. The heavy silence was broken only by the sound of cold water hitting the sink as she twisted the tap. She wet a clean towel, wrung it out tightly, and returned to Ken. Her movements were fluid, unhesitant, like flowing water. Yet, beneath that calm exterior, a volcanic rage seethed within her. "Here, cool it down," she instructed, kneeling before the sofa and gently pressing the cold towel to her son's swollen cheek. Ken's body shivered slightly, and she felt the coldness seep into his hot skin. The stinging pain on Ken's cheek seemed to flow directly into Sarah's fingertips and then into her heart. This pain is my pain. This humiliation is my humiliation. A pauper, you say? Sarah murmured inwardly, to no one in particular. Her 28 years flashed before her eyes. Her husband, Thomas, had fallen ill when Ken was just 5. She had prayed to God countless times, holding her weakening husband's hand. But her prayers went unanswered, and Thomas quietly passed away. Staring up at the sterile white ceiling of the hospital, she resolved to raise young Ken alone. The chilling loneliness of that day. She woke at 4 every morning to prepare Ken's packed lunch, delivered newspapers, and then headed to her office. In the evenings, she picked Ken up from childcare, fed him, put him to bed, and then typed data for freelance work late into the night. She sacrificed sleep, postponed her own meals, all to ensure Ken, growing up without a father, lacked nothing. She was desperate. In the male-dominated world of a major conglomerate, she knew being a woman and a single mother was an uphill battle. She bit her lip and endured heartless rumors and harassment, believing that only her merit could protect her and her son. She worked harder than anyone, produced better results than anyone. The title of director she had earned was a crystallization of her blood, sweat, and tears, an invaluable source of pride. Charming men in some shady business, Eleanor's mother, Mrs. Eleanor Finch, had sneered. Those words trampled Sarah's pride underfoot. Unforgivable, absolutely unforgivable. This wasn't just her problem. This was an affront to their 28 years as a family who had fought so hard since her husband's passing. "Ken," Sarah said, gently stroking her son's cheek over the towel. "Tell me more. Who exactly is this Mrs. Finch?" Prompted by his mother's calm but unyielding voice, Ken began to speak, falteringly. Mrs. Finch was the wife of the director of Finch General Hospital, one of the most prominent hospitals in the county. She was unusually proud, placing immense value on family lineage and social standing. And the moment she learned about Ken's family background during the engagement meeting, her expression had turned as cold as a mask. As she listened, countless pieces of information rapidly connected and organized themselves in Sarah's mind. Finch General Hospital. The name wasn't unfamiliar. In fact, it had been one of her targets for years. "So, she's the director's wife," Sarah murmured quietly, then slowly rose. She patted Ken's shoulder gently. "Get some rest. I'll go prepare dinner." She left the living room, her back no longer that of a wounded mother, but rather that of a warrior who had forged a colossal resolve. Once she confirmed Ken was resting in his room, Sarah walked directly to her study. Beside the grand mahogany desk stood a wall-to-wall bookcase. She quietly pressed a section of it, revealing the heavy metal door of a hidden safe. Her fingers, devoid of hesitation, spun the dial and opened the door. Inside sat neither thick financial reports nor costly jewels, but a single, black, leather-bound notebook. The cool touch of the leather brought Sarah's burning emotions back to a state of calm. She placed the notebook on the desk and slowly turned its pages. Neatly inscribed within were words that revealed her other identity, British Medical Holdings, and beneath it a list of acquisition targets, including several hospital names. Sarah's icy gaze fixed on the name, circled in red at the bottom of the list, Finch General Hospital. The corner of her lips curved upward slightly. It was a smile too cold, too dangerous to be called a mere smile. At this very moment, a vow of silent, yet absolute, retribution was sworn against those who had struck her son and trampled upon the dignity of her family. Her true battle was about to begin. The cold air of the study pricked Sarah's skin. She closed the black notebook and returned to the living room. Ken, curled on the sofa, looked small and fragile in the deepening twilight. The fiery anger she had felt earlier had transformed into a deep sorrow and a touch of disappointment in her son. "Ken?" she called softly. Ken jolted, lifting his head. His eyes were bloodshot, still trembling with the anxiousness of a lost child. Sarah stood directly in front of him, meeting his gaze. "There's something I need to ask you," she said, her voice now carrying a sharper tone than before. "Why didn't you speak up then? Why were you silent when I was insulted?" It was a question not just from a mother, but from one human to another. Ken's eyes darted away, his lips quivering. He tried to speak but swallowed his words. His distress gnawed at Sarah's heart. Were you afraid because she's the director's wife? A person of power? Her piercing words twisted Ken's face in pain. No, it's not like that, he protested, flustered, but his voice lacked conviction. He explained that it had been so sudden, his mind had gone blank. However, Sarah knew all too well that wasn't the whole truth. He's always been like this. Calling him too kind sounded good, but it often served as an excuse for his weakness, for avoiding conflict. In secondary school, when he tried to protect a bullied child, he became the target himself. Even then, Ken chose to endure, reasoning that his tormentors were too many and speaking to teachers would be futile. He cried alone until Sarah intervened at the school. You need the courage to call out what's right, Ken, especially when protecting someone you care about. Sarah's words quietly pierced Ken's chest. You didn't protect me today. Instead, you let them hit you, submitted to their words, and came home defeated. Don't you think that's pathetic? Her words were harsh, but they needed to be said. If she didn't, Ken would continue to cry, unable to protect what he valued in the face of unreasonable power throughout his life. Large tears welled up in Ken's eyes again. I know, Mom. I know I'm pathetic, but I was scared. Scared of losing my position at the company, my relationship with Eleanor, everything. And in the end, you lost everything anyway, didn't you? Sarah's cold, logical gaze met his. Ken buried his face in his hands, uttering a soft groan. Listening to his lament, Sarah sighed deeply. She didn't want to attack her son. She simply wanted this frustration, this pain, to be etched into his very soul. She wanted him to stand on his own feet, to have the strength to fight against injustice. However, the fact Ken recounted next was a brutal reality that couldn't be dismissed merely as his weakness. And Ken lifted his head, his expression now different from the self-loathing of before. It was stained with pure despair. Eleanor said the same thing as her mother in the end. What? Sarah's heart gave an unpleasant lurch. When Mrs. Finch tried to throw me out of their house, Eleanor cried and told me, I'm sorry, Ken, but my mother might have a point. Ken's voice trembled, almost fading. Maybe deep down, I also wanted to marry someone from a proper, two-parent family. Those words, sharper than the pain of the slap on Ken's cheek, pierced his heart. A definitive betrayal from someone he trusted, a woman he loved. It was a blow more than sufficient to crush the last vestiges of hope and pride within Ken. Sarah was speechless. Could there be such cruelty? More than the injury to her son's cheek, she felt dizzy at the depth of the wound now etched into his heart. Her anger towards Mrs. Eleanor Finch, and a chilling contempt for Eleanor, who could only obey her mother, slowly but surely took shape within Sarah. This was no longer just a family quarrel. This was an undeniable war for human dignity. It was past 1 a.m. when she finally confirmed her wounded son was asleep in his room. Sarah sat alone on the living room sofa, surrounded by an air as cold and taut as ice. The gentleness and sorrow of a mother she had shown her son had vanished without a trace, replaced by the keen, cold light of a predator stalking its prey. There was no longer any reason to hesitate. Sarah picked up her smartphone and called a name from her address book. After several rings, a quiet, yet resolute female voice answered. Yes, Mary here. I'm sorry to call you so late, Mary. Sarah's voice was different from when she spoke to Ken, lower and imbued with absolute authority. Chairwoman, is there an urgent matter? Mary, on the other end, showed no sign of agitation. She was one of the few trusted confidantes who knew Sarah, ostensibly a director at a trading company, was secretly the chairwoman overseeing the massive medical conglomerate, British Medical Holdings, BMH. For 20 years, Mary had served as Sarah's unwavering aide, supporting all her ambitions and strategies, her most trusted business partner. Urgent. Report on the progress regarding Finch General Hospital immediately. Yes, everything is proceeding as planned. As of the end of last month, we have acquired 68% of the outstanding shares through multiple shell companies. We are in a position to take control of management at any time. Mary's reports were always concise and accurate. Sarah nodded silently, gazing out at the pitch-black night view spread outside the window. The lights of the town twinkled like jewels. Beneath each of those lights, people lived their lives. And among them were those who, shielded by power, thought nothing of trampling on the dignity of others. Finch General Hospital. In recent years, its deteriorating financial condition, the autocratic management of the founding Finch family, harassment of staff, and declining patient satisfaction had all been flagged as issues. BMH, recognizing its excellent location and potential value, had been carefully accumulating shares over 3 years with the aim of rebuilding it. The original plan was to confront the management with the fact of the acquisition at next month's regular board meeting and smoothly transition control. But circumstances had changed. Mary, Sarah's tone dropped another notch. We are drastically moving up the schedule. On the other end of the line, Mary gasped, then caught her breath. But she quickly regained her professional composure. Very well, a smooth transition is no longer necessary. I want them to experience despair. Her voice held a strange balance of a ruthless businesswoman's coldness and a mother's rage at having her son hurt. Call an emergency board meeting 2 weeks from now. Follow all formal procedures under the Companies Act. No prior notice is needed for Director Finch. Summon them without fail on the morning of the meeting, 2 weeks from now. Understood. 2 weeks it is. The agenda is clear, I presume, Sarah stated imperiously, like a queen delivering the final checkmate on a chessboard. The immediate replacement of the current management. The immediate dismissal of Director Eleanor Finch, her husband, and all members of their family. Understood. After a moment of silence, Mary responded firmly. She had instantly grasped the unyielding nature of Sarah's resolve. I will immediately assemble the necessary legal team and financial experts. In 2 weeks, I will present you with perfect preparations. Thank you. And one more thing. Sarah recalled the insulting words Mrs. Finch had hurled at Ken. Thoroughly investigate the personal assets of the Finches. Every illegitimate financial flow, every hidden asset, every hint of tax evasion, miss nothing. If you dig, I'm sure you'll find plenty. All the dirty money they siphoned from the hospital as well. This was not merely a corporate acquisition. This was a complete annihilation aimed at ending the arrogant legacy of a family. Hanging up, Sarah gazed at a childhood photograph of Ken displayed on her smartphone screen. To protect that innocent smile, she would become a devil if she had to. Mrs. Finch, you have trod on the tail of a tiger that should never have been awakened. In 2 weeks, I will show you, to your very bones, that the power and wealth you so blindly trust will collapse with a sound. I will make you realize that the woman you scorned as a pauper from a single-parent home was the god of your world. A week passed since that humiliating night. While the swelling on Ken's cheek had subsided, the emotional wound still felt raw, throbbing. He was withdrawn, unable to focus on work, spending most of his time cooped up in his room. Sarah watched him silently. Her script for revenge was steadily being prepared for its final act. For now, she could only weather the calm before the storm. One afternoon, Ken's smartphone vibrated. The caller ID displayed the name of the person who had wounded him most deeply. Eleanor, his former fiancée. Ken's body stiffened for a moment. Then, as if making a decision, he pressed the answer button. Hello, Ken? It's Eleanor. I'm so sorry for calling you out of the blue. Her voice, thin and tear-choked, came from the other end. I'm truly sorry about that day. Even though I couldn't go against my mother, I still said those awful things. Please, can I just apologize to you properly, just once? Ken's heart wavered at her desperate plea. Despite the profound betrayal, a lingering affection for her might still reside somewhere in his heart. After a brief consideration, Ken simply said, "Okay," and arranged to meet at a nearby hotel lounge. From the crack in the living room door, Sarah observed the scene, her eyes glinting with a cold light. Eleanor's contact. The timing is far too convenient. This is undoubtedly a scheme orchestrated by her mother, Mrs. Finch. Sarah immediately moved to another room and sent a concise instruction to her secretary, Mary, activate the surveillance team immediately. The target is meeting my son. Don't miss a single word. The next day, Ken waited for Eleanor in the designated hotel lounge, his heart filled with nervous anticipation. When she arrived, she looked distraught, her eyes red and swollen. "Ken, I am so truly sorry," Eleanor began, bowing her head as she sat down. Ken watched her with complex emotions. Eleanor tearfully recounted how much her mother, Mrs. Finch, cared about appearances and how she herself had been unable to escape those values. "But losing you made me realize, for the first time, how much more important our time together was than family background or money," she pleaded. "Please, can I have just one more chance?" Ken's heart was deeply swayed by her words, but then an unexpected phrase escaped Eleanor's lips. "My mother, you know, she's actually having a few regrets too. She said if your company proves to be a promising, successful enterprise in the future, she might allow our marriage. What projects is your company currently working on? Is there any significant development that could impact future performance?" At that moment, something within Ken snapped. Was her apology, her tears, all an act to extract this information? His company was currently pursuing a highly confidential, large-scale project that could determine the future of their industry. If that information leaked, the company would suffer immeasurable damage. Despair turned to anger. Ken slowly rose. "That's enough," he said, his voice cold. Eleanor looked up, her face pale. "I never thought you could be so utterly corrupt. Goodbye." As Ken turned to leave, Mary, impeccably dressed in a suit, quietly entered the lounge with several other individuals. She approached Eleanor's stunned table, took out a small IC recorder, and pressed play. From the speaker, a familiar, high-pitched, hysterical female voice resonated. "Listen, Eleanor, get that pauper's son to spill company secrets. It's the least we can do for that family. If you get valuable information, I might even give you some severance pay. If you can't, you're disowned." Mrs. Finch's cold, vulgar voice echoed through the lounge. Other patrons at nearby tables turned their attention to the scene. Eleanor's face drained of color, turning deathly pale. Mary stopped the recording and presented a business card to the frozen Eleanor. "Miss Eleanor Finch, this conversation and your previous conversation with Mr. Ken have all been recorded. We will submit this as evidence of attempted unauthorized acquisition of corporate secrets and coercion to the appropriate authorities." Then, Mary turned and bowed deeply to the standing Ken. "Mr. Ken, a message from the chairwoman. Your doubts have now been erased, haven't they?" Ken instantly understood the meaning of those words. This had all been orchestrated by his mother, to cut through his own weakness and to expose the enemy's despicable nature in broad daylight. Ken looked at Eleanor, trembling on the verge of despair, now with no emotion. The last cloud of lingering affection in his heart had completely vanished. A few days after the charade at the lounge, Mrs. Finch paced irritably in the Finch mansion's living room. Since Eleanor's report that the plan had failed and their conversation had been recorded, an unknown dread had settled over her like a black fog. "What are you so scared of, Eleanor? She's just a common director at a trading company, isn't she? What can a mere recording do?" Her husband, Mr. Finch, the director of Finch General Hospital, scoffed, leaning back on the sofa and reading his newspaper. To him, Sarah was merely the mother of a poor single-parent family whom his son had coincidentally become entangled with. He firmly believed she was an insignificant aunt before their social status and power. "But darling, that woman, there's something unnerving about her." "This premonition I have isn't wrong," Mrs. Finch insisted. Her gut feeling was not wrong at all. Just then, a telephone bell, jarringly loud in the otherwise quiet house, began to ring. The servant answered and, after a brief pause, nervously informed Mrs. Finch, "Madam, a miss. Sarah Hamilton is on the phone for you personally." Mrs. Finch's heart gave a great leap. "Has Mr. Finch called from work? How amusing," she muttered, a sneer twisting her lips. She took the receiver, forcing her voice to be calm. "Hello, this is Mrs. Finch." "Ah, Mrs. Eleanor Finch, is that right? I am Sarah Hamilton. My son was greatly indebted to you the other day." The voice from the other end was surprisingly calm and as beautiful as a ringing bell. "Mrs." Finch was momentarily bewildered by the polite tone and the air of refinement in the voice. She had expected a hysterical, tearful outburst or a demand for money. "What is it that you want? I believe I made it quite clear to your son to know his place." Mrs. Finch snapped, trying to project an air of superiority. But Sarah showed no sign of agitation. Indeed, I believe it was a valuable lesson for my son. By the way, Mrs. Finch, you recently attempted to illegally obtain internal company information using your daughter Eleanor, didn't you? Mrs. Finch gasped. What are you talking about? Do you have proof? Oh yes. We have clear evidence, your recorded voice. My lawyers have confirmed this constitutes malicious attempted industrial espionage, which could lead to criminal charges. I was very worried. Sarah's voice remained perfectly calm, but each word was like an invisible ice blade pressed against Mrs. Finch's throat. What do you want? If it's money, just say so. Mrs. Finch finally lost her composure and shouted. She thought, if money can solve this, I'll pay a hefty sum. But Sarah's answer far exceeded her imagination. Oh no, thank you. I have no need for such vulgar things. Sarah chuckled softly on the other end of the line. Her laugh was cold enough to send shivers down Mrs. Finch's spine, yet filled with absolute confidence. What I desire is not money, not something so base. What I wish to take, you see. Sarah paused deliberately. Then, in a voice like a death knell, she declared, is everything your family has built up until now. In 2 weeks, Mrs. Finch, your lives will be over. All the power, wealth, and honor you so tirelessly pursued will turn to rubble. The humiliation and despair my son suffered, now you will experience it yourselves, in full. It was not a threat. It was an utterance resembling a divine prophecy, calmly stating a future already decided. Please enjoy the remaining 2 weeks of your grandeur to your heart's content, Mrs. Finch. With that, Sarah unilaterally ended the call. The sterile click of the dial tone echoed emptily in Mrs. Finch's ears. She stood there, clutching the receiver, her face ashen, her fingertips trembling. What's wrong? What did she say? Mr. Finch asked, sensing something was gravely amiss. Mrs. Finch relayed Sarah's words in a trembling voice. A mere director at a trading company? What foolishness! Mr. Finch scoffed, but his voice lacked the arrogance of before. Mrs. Finch's soul had sensed it. That woman is serious, and that quiet confidence must be backed by something beyond our imagination. However, at that moment, they had no way of knowing that countless cracks had already begun to appear in the foundation of the colossal castle that had supported the Finch family's grandeur. The countdown to their ruin was now unstoppable. The days leading up to the fateful phone call from Sarah to the day of destiny saw Sarah's routine astonishingly calm on the surface. She woke early as usual, prepared a nutritionally balanced breakfast for Ken, and went to work. To all appearances, she was merely a loving, concerned mother and an efficient director at a trading company. However, beneath this calm surface, a massive storm was gathering strength with each passing moment. Her secretary, Mary, sent encrypted progress reports late every night. The legal team had meticulously finalized all legal preparations for convening the emergency board meeting, and the financial experts had a complete grasp of the Finch family's opaque asset flows. All that remained was to await the appointed day. Ken was slowly beginning to regain his composure. Perhaps his encounter with Eleanor had provided a catharsis. There was no longer the same despair in his eyes. However, he harbored a lingering unease and question regarding his mother, Sarah, who had remained unusually quiet since that humiliating incident. "Mom?" Ken tentatively spoke one evening in the living room, where Sarah was quietly reading a book. "Are you really not going to do anything? Are you just going to accept this?" Ken felt his mother couldn't possibly remain silent after such an insult. At the same time, if his mother was planning anything reckless, he felt he had to stop her. Sarah looked up from her book, gazing at her son with a gentle smile. "Accept it? Do I look like that sort of person?" Her light-hearted, teasing tone reassured Ken slightly. "But you haven't done anything, have you? Like reporting it to the police or consulting with a lawyer?" Sarah closed her book and beckoned Ken to sit beside her. She gently placed a hand on his cheek. "True strength isn't about raising your fist or shouting at your opponent, dear." Her eyes were as calm and deep as a nocturnal lake. "True strength is about calmly assessing the situation, delivering the most effective blow at the most effective time, and settling the match completely so your opponent can never rise again. The unfathomable resolve and strategic depth in her words made Ken gasp. The woman before him was not just his usually gentle mother. She wore the face of a seasoned general or a ruthless strategist. "Perhaps this incident was a major test for our family," Sarah continued. "Perhaps I was too overprotective of you, my son. In my desire for you to grow up strong, untainted by power or wealth, I shielded you too much from the injustices of the world. As a result, you became an adult without knowing how to fight for your own dignity." Her observation sharply struck Ken's core. It was precisely true. And I, too, have been hiding my true self behind the mask of a mother. "Perhaps that was also a mistake," Sarah murmured, her gaze distant as she looked out the window. "So, this is a battle for both of us, to reclaim our true selves. You must overcome this humiliation in your own way and become strong, and I will settle matters in my own way." Ken still couldn't fully grasp the implications of her words, but he keenly sensed that his mother was planning something extraordinary. "So, Ken, you don't need to worry about anything, just watch closely what is about to unfold, and never look away. That is your only role." Ken could only nod at Sarah's quiet, yet absolutely confident voice. Feeling his mother's immeasurable strength and the deep love beneath it, his chest warmed. The storm was close, yet its eye was unnervingly calm. It was not to be a massive hurricane that would swallow and destroy everything, and controlling that hurricane's eye was the quiet rage of one mother, Sarah Hamilton. Immediately after Sarah's declaration of war, an eerie tension had hung over the Finch household. But as days passed and nothing changed, Mr. and Mrs. Finch gradually reverted to their usual arrogance. Just an empty threat, after all. "A poor loser's bluff," Mr. Finch sneered, swirling a glass of expensive brandy. Mrs. Finch, too, who had initially felt an unknown terror, slowly began to feel reassured by her husband's attitude. "You're right. After all, we live in different worlds. No matter what she tries, she can't possibly harm the Finch family." They believed their power was absolute and unshakable. For years, as prominent figures in the community, this was an undeniable truth for them. The politicians they influenced, the executives of major corporations they dealt with, and above all, the enormous castle of a hospital that moved at their whim. There was no way a single individual, let alone a woman from a single-parent family, could break through such strong defenses. They believed this, implicitly. The prelude to their ruin began to play quietly, in places they couldn't hear 3 days before the emergency board meeting. That day, Mr. Finch, the director, met with the branch manager of their main bank, Whitehall Bank, with whom he had a long-standing relationship. The discussion was about additional financing to renovate the hospital's aging facilities. The branch manager, as always, smiled deferentially and nodded at Mr. Finch's words. "Director Finch, of course, we will give this our positive consideration. Finch General Hospital is our most valued client, after all." Mr. Finch nodded with satisfaction. Even this man, he thought, couldn't defy the power of money. However, a few hours after the branch manager left, a phone call came to Mr. Finch from the same man, his voice completely changed. "Director, something terrible has happened." "What is it? What happened?" "It's about that loan request from earlier. The higher-ups at headquarters have thrown a wrench into it." The branch manager's voice was filled with panic. "Not only is the loan immediately denied, but orders have come down to demand immediate full repayment of all existing loans we've extended to you." "What?" Mr. Finch involuntarily shot up from his chair. "Don't be ridiculous. That's impossible. Whose orders are these?" "I don't know, sir. They only said it was at the behest of a huge investment fund called British Medical Holdings." "British Medical Holdings?" Mr. Finch frowned at the unfamiliar name. Who are these nobodies? But having controlled banks for years, he understood the grave implications of this notice all too well. This was no mere harassment. This was a clear attack, aimed at cutting off their funding at the source. Meanwhile, back at her mansion, Mrs. Finch, who was elegantly enjoying afternoon tea, also received a phone call. The caller was the wife of a local dignitary, who chaired the charity parties Mrs. Finch hosted. "Hello, Mrs. Finch. I'm terribly sorry to tell you this, but we've had to cancel next month's party." "What? What do you mean?" For Mrs. Finch, this party was the most important event for maintaining her social standing. All the corporations that were scheduled to sponsor have withdrawn. Everyone is saying they've been strictly ordered from above to reconsider all their dealings with the Finch family. From above. What above? Everyone is being vague, but it seems they've offended the leader of a certain organization with immense influence in the medical industry. Mrs. Finch, after hanging up, noticed her hand, clutching the teacup, was trembling. Coincidence? No, it can't be. The pressure on the bank and the withdrawal of party sponsors. These were clearly orchestrated by the same will. An invisible, colossal force was quietly, yet surely, filling in the moat around the castle they had built. Sarah Hamilton. That woman's icy declaration echoed in her mind. In 2 weeks, your lives will be over. It's impossible for that one woman to do all this. Yet, an unknown terror slowly gnawed at Mrs. Finch's heart. The castle of their arrogance, which they believed impregnable, was beginning to crumble at its foundations. The ominous sound of destruction was now clearly reaching their ears. The day of destiny. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday, Finch General Hospital was enveloped in an unusual atmosphere from the morning. Several unfamiliar black luxury cars were parked at the main entrance, and stern-faced men in suits stood in various parts of the lobby. Staff members whispered amongst themselves, unsure what was happening. At 9 a.m., a legal team, identifying themselves as from the legal department, pushed their way into Mr. Finch's office without an appointment. We are convening an emergency board meeting today at 10 a.m. This is a formal request from shareholders based on Section 399, Article 3 of the Companies Act. The lawyer thrust a convocation notice at Mr. Finch. The name of the requesting party listed there was British Medical Holdings. It was the name he had heard in the phone call from the bank. Are you serious? By what authority? By this authority. We are the largest shareholder, holding 68% of the outstanding shares. Mr. Finch's face drained of color at the calmly stated fact. This must be a mistake. Our hospital's shares were supposedly held by long-standing business partners and local dignitaries as stable shareholders. How did this happen? Mr. Finch and Mrs. Finch, who had rushed to the conference room in a state of panic, arrived to find all the directors already seated. Everyone was silent, their expressions a mix of anxiety and confusion. And in the main seat, where Mr. Finch should have been, a woman quietly sat. The moment she slowly lifted her face, Mrs. Finch froze. Sarah Hamilton, the woman from the photograph Ken had shown her on his smartphone the other day. But her aura was completely different. This was no common mother from a trading company. Her presence radiated an overwhelming dignity and authority, like a queen ruling a kingdom. "Good morning, Mr. Finch, Director, and Mrs. Finch," Sarah greeted in a crisp voice, then slowly rose. "Thank you all for gathering today. Allow me to reintroduce myself. I am Sarah Hamilton, Chairwoman of British Medical Holdings." Chairwoman? The entire conference room buzzed with incredulity. Mr. Finch trembled, his expression disbelieving. As of today, Finch General Hospital has become a wholly owned subsidiary of our BMH Group. The lawyer standing beside Sarah calmly explained that the acquisition was legally complete. Mr. and Mrs. Finch could only stare blankly at the scene, as if caught in a nightmare. Therefore, as part of our management restructuring, I hereby announce the new management team, Sarah said, glancing at the documents in her hand. Then she looked up again, her icy gaze piercing Mr. and Mrs. Finch, current director Mr. Eleanor Finch, and all executives associated with his family are hereby dismissed from their positions, effective today. What are you saying? Are you mad? This hospital has been built up by the Finch family for generations. Mr. Finch roared like a beast. But Sarah was completely unperturbed. Built up, you say? It's a hospital with a splendid history, isn't it? Yet, the result is 3 consecutive years of operating losses and the lowest patient satisfaction in the county, isn't it? The screen Sarah indicated displayed merciless data, illustrating the hospital's dismal financial state. The directors lowered their heads, speechless. Our philosophy is to contribute to people's well-being through medicine. Unfortunately, we have determined that the current management is not qualified for this. At that moment, Mrs. Finch, who had been silent until now, spoke in a trembling voice. You said you were just a director at a trading company the other day. Indeed, I also serve as a director of an affiliated company, but that is merely one of my many faces. Sarah slowly walked towards Mrs. Finch, and then, in a voice only she could hear, she whispered like a devil in her ear, "Surprised, Mrs. Finch? The woman you despised as a pauper from a single-parent home has become the new owner of your hospital." Mrs. Finch's knees buckled. She collapsed onto the chair with a thud. Sarah merely glanced at her, then turned back to the entire conference room, declaring in a clear voice, "2 weeks ago, your wife struck my only son with her own hand." This room fell silent. She trampled on a person's dignity with her power, for no other reason than that he came from a single-parent, poor background. Now, the one who has stripped you of everything is that pauper from a single-parent home whom you utterly despised. Do you understand what this means? It was a complete death sentence from an absolute victor. The castle of arrogance had now crumbled with a crash, and Sarah, standing amidst the rubble, looked cold and beautiful, like a goddess of justice. The judgment had been delivered. Mr. and Mrs. Finch were mercilessly dragged from their throne as masters of the castle they had reigned over for so long. Stripped of all power, assets, and honor in an instant, the two sat motionless in the conference room chairs, like empty shells from which their souls had departed. Under Sarah's direction, the new management team was introduced, and policies for the hospital's future were announced one after another. During this time, not a single person offered words of sympathy to the Finches. For the directors and staff, who had suffered for years under their arrogant, dictatorial management, this truly signified liberation from oppression. Mr. and Mrs. Finch, former director and his wife, please collect all your personal belongings from this hospital today. Mary, the secretary, stated robotically, but with unyielding authority. At her words, the two were finally jolted back to reality. Urged by the men standing like guards, they walked with faltering steps towards the director's office. That once luxurious room was no longer theirs. Staff members passing in the corridor watched the two packing their belongings into cardboard boxes from a distance and with cold eyes. Their gazes held not pity, but sharp daggers of long-held resentment and contempt. The humiliation of being looked down upon by those they had always scorned was unbearable for Mrs. Finch. "Please, Chairwoman Hamilton, please have mercy." Mrs. Finch, having just finished the meeting, fell to her knees, weeping, in front of Sarah as she walked down the corridor. Sarah cast a cold glance at her pride-shattered figure. "I was completely wrong about everything the other day. I apologize." "I'll apologize as much as you want, so please, just don't kick us out of this hospital." "Have mercy." "Mercy," Sarah quietly countered. "Did you show mercy to my son? When you so cruelly trampled on his heart and my pride, was there a shred of mercy in your heart?" Mrs. Finch could not answer. "The pain of the wound you left in my son's heart, and the burning sensation of the handprint left on his cheek, now you will experience them yourself, in your own body. That is the just price you must pay." Sarah pushed her away mercilessly and tried to pass her, but at that moment, Mrs. Finch, as if summoning her last strength, desperately clung to Sarah's feet. "If it's money, I'll give you all my personal assets." "No, thank you." Sarah coldly shook her hand away. "I don't need a single penny of your dirty money, because—" Sarah took a document from Mary and thrust it in front of Mrs. Finch. "All your personal assets have already been frozen by BMH's legal department." The document listed bank accounts, securities, and even their mansion as assets to be seized. It was the first step in a claim for damages due to years of opaque expense, manipulation, and fraudulent activities. Mrs. Finch was completely speechless. Nothing was left to them. That fact descended upon her head like a gigantic iron hammer of despair. Expelled from the hospital in disgrace, the two returned to their mansion by taxi, only to find further hell awaiting them. At the imposing iron gate stood court bailiffs and several workers, and on the gate a single red notice was cruelly posted, announcing the end of their lives: seized. Those two characters glowed blood red and ominously in the twilight. From inside the house, the sounds of furniture being removed echoed ominously. The place that was supposed to be their castle was now being dismantled before their eyes. Ah, Missus. Finch collapsed to the ground, letting out an animalistic shriek. Upon the rubble of her pride, she could only weep. It was the tears of regret and despair, shed for the first time by an arrogant queen who had lost everything. That afternoon, Sarah summoned Ken to the former director's office, which had become her temporary study. Ken, completely unaware of what had transpired, looked around the lavish room with a mixture of anxiety and confusion. "Mum, what is this place? Why are you in a place like this?" "Sit down, Ken. It seems the time has come to tell you everything." Sarah seated her son on the opposite sofa and began to calmly, openly recount the entire truth. She revealed that she was not just a trading company director, but the chairwoman of the massive medical conglomerate, British Medical Holdings. That she had built this empire over 20 years, following the will of her late husband, to revolutionize healthcare in Britain. And that Finch General Hospital had originally been on BMH's acquisition list. Ken listened to his mother's story in a daze, as if hearing an epic tale. His mind reeled at the fact that the mother before him was a colossal, overwhelming presence he had never known. And then, Sarah calmly recounted the full scope of the spectacular revenge she had orchestrated against the Finch family over the past 2 weeks. The pressure on the bank, the withdrawal of sponsors, and today's dismissal of the entire family and seizure of their assets at the emergency board meeting. "Why? Why didn't you tell me anything until now?" Ken asked, his voice strained after hearing everything. His voice trembled, not with anger, but with deep confusion and loneliness. "Because I wanted you to live a normal life," Sarah quietly replied. "I wanted you to find your own value and grow up strong, without being influenced by my position or wealth. That was my only wish as a mother." At her words, tears welled up in Ken's eyes. He now understood, for the first time, that the peaceful everyday life he had taken for granted had actually been protected by his mother's immeasurable efforts and deep love. At the same time, a fierce shame surged within his chest. His mother, all alone, had moved such a colossal world and stood up against unjust power, while what had he been doing? He had been beaten and insulted, and had merely wept. The shame, the powerlessness of remaining silent without a single word of protest when his beloved mother was insulted, shook his soul violently. "Mum, I couldn't protect you. I'm a pathetic, terrible son." Ken covered his face with his hands and sobbed like a child. Sarah quietly knelt before her son and gently took his hands. "No, that's not true, Ken. You grew up to be a kind child who understands other people's pain, rather than putting them down. That alone fills my life." His mother's warm hands enveloped his heart. "But," Sarah continued, "kindness alone sometimes isn't enough to protect what's important. Sometimes you have to bare your fangs and fight against unreasonable malice. You must have learned that from this incident too." Ken lifted his tear-stained face. His mother's eyes gazed directly into his. In their depths, he felt unshakable strength and infinite love. "That's right. It's no time for crying anymore. I am the son of this great mother. I cannot remain weak." He utterly condemned his own weakness. And in that moment, he firmly resolved to live strongly and proudly, like his mother. Something awakened within him. It was a sound like a roar, as a young man was reborn from a child who was merely protected into a true adult who could protect others. Ken wiped away his tears and met his mother's gaze clearly. There was no longer the weak light of before in his eyes. What was there was the strong light of steel-like resolve. "Mum, I want to meet with the Finches too," he said in a firm tone, "not to demand an apology for hitting me, but to end this story with my own words, with my own strength, and to take a step forward as a new me." Sarah smiled quietly and proudly at her son's remarkably grown-up figure. The car Sarah arranged quietly stopped in a part of the city lined with old apartment buildings, far from the city center. The Finches, who had lived in a magnificent mansion just days ago, were now said to be living quietly in a room in this 4-story apartment building. Ken looked up at the building from the car window. Peeling paint and rusty railings. It was the very symbol of the poor world they had always looked down upon. Sarah, sitting beside him, watched her son's profile in silence. Climbing the apartment stairs, Ken knocked on the door of the designated room. From inside, a haggard Mrs. Finch tentatively peeked out. Seeing Ken and Sarah standing beside him, her face contorted with terror and shock. "What do you want? We have nothing left." Mr. Finch's irritated voice came from inside the room, but Ken was undeterred. He looked directly into Mrs. Finch's eyes and quietly said, "We've come to talk. You, the Finches." Mrs. Finch seemed to sense something from his calm demeanor. She resignedly invited them into the room. The cramped, six-mat tatami room contained only minimal, haphazardly placed furniture. There was no trace of their former grandeur. Mr. Finch sat in the corner of the room, clutching his knees, glaring at Ken and Sarah with a tormented expression. Even in the face of such a pitiful scene, Ken's heart was surprisingly calm. There was no pity, nor any base joy like getting his due. He simply, quietly accepted the reality before him. The next moment, Mrs. Finch suddenly put her hands on the tatami mat and prostrated herself before Ken. "Mr. Ken, I am truly sorry. Please, I beg you, forgive me." Mrs. Finch wept, rubbing her forehead on the tatami. Her figure was utterly pathetic. Yet Ken calmly accepted her apology. "Please, lift your head, Mrs. Finch." At Ken's voice, Mrs. Finch cautiously looked up. "I will probably never truly forgive what you did. The pain in my cheek is gone, but the insult my mother received and the wound in my heart won't disappear so easily." Mrs. Finch's face was stained with despair at his words. But Ken continued, "However, I will not continue to hate you. I don't want to spend my precious life on such a thing." It was the practice of true strength his mother had taught him. Revenge ends when the opponent is defeated. There is no need to live the rest of your life dominated by hatred. I didn't come here today to forgive you. I only came to hear one answer from your own lips. Ken looked at Mr. Finch, who remained silent in the corner of the room, and then he quietly posed the question that was the core of this final confrontation. "Just tell me one thing. Why did you insult my mother so much? Was it so unforgivable that I came from a single-parent family?" That question pierced the deepest, ugliest, and most hidden part of Mrs. Finch's heart. For a while, her lips trembled, and she looked down, as if hesitating to speak. But, met by Ken's sincere, unaccusing gaze, she eventually began to confess everything, as if a dam had broken. Mrs. Finch's voice was faint and trembling. "I am not from the privileged background you imagine. I was the daughter of a small factory owner in a much poorer district of this town." It was the beginning of her true, unknown past. Ken and Sarah listened in silence to her confession of guilt. That confession was uglier and more full of sad complexes than they had imagined. Mrs. Finch's confession was shocking. She had been born into a poor family and, tormented by a fierce complex about it, had abandoned her hometown in her youth, fabricating her entire background and lineage. She had desperately acquired manners and education, and by marrying Mr. Finch, the son of a wealthy family whom she met by chance, she had finally achieved the upper-class status she craved. "That's why I couldn't forgive it," Mrs. Finch said, tears streaming from her eyes. "A person like your mother, Sarah, who achieves social success solely through her own strength and talent, without wearing a mask like me. And above all, she receives the genuine respect and love from her son that I could never obtain." Her words were disjointed, but the underlying emotion was a pure, ugly jealousy. "While calling you a pauper from a single-parent home, the truly poor person, the one without a place in her heart, was me. Your genuine bond as mother and son shone so brightly, it was dazzling, and I couldn't bear the envy." It was an ugly and sad cry from her soul. The genuine dignity and accomplishments of Sarah and Ken, an authentic bond she lacked, seemed to threaten her fabricated world. Therefore, by hitting Ken and insulting Sarah, she desperately wanted to assert her own superiority, unaware of how foolish and disastrous her actions would be. Mrs. Finch, having poured out everything, collapsed onto the tatami, weeping. Mr. Finch, who had been listening in the corner of the room, was also stunned by his wife's confession, which he was hearing for the first time. He had believed the facade his wife had created without question until now. A heavy silence filled the room. Eventually, the silence was broken by Sarah, who had listened to everything in silence. "I understand. You're suffering." Her voice was surprisingly calm. Sarah stood up and walked to the front of the weeping Mrs. Finch. "You made a grave mistake. You trampled on a person's dignity and lost everything due to the weight of your sin. That is an undeniable fact." Mrs. Finch's body trembled slightly. "However," Sarah continued, "life doesn't end there. Anyone can start over, any number of times, if you have that resolve." Sarah took a brochure from her pocket and placed it in front of the two. It showed a small clinic surrounded by lush green mountains. "This is a clinic in a depopulated area in the rural northern England. For years, it has suffered from a doctor shortage, and the elderly in the community are struggling to receive medical care." Mr. and Mrs. Finch looked up at Sarah in disbelief. "If you are truly willing to atone for your past sins and wish to live for others once more, why don't you start over here, from scratch? Not as a director or his wife, but as a single doctor, as a single human being." It was both a punishment and a salvation. There were no luxurious facilities or high salaries. There were only people who genuinely needed medical care. "Of course, I won't force you. The choice is yours. Will you choose a new life, atoning for your past sins here, or will you wither away here, hating each other and cursing the past?" The hand Sarah extended was either a lifeline or a final test. A long, long silence hung in the air. Eventually, Mr. Finch slowly lifted his head. His eyes no longer held the arrogance of before, but a deep remorse. "Please, let us go," he said, placing his hands on the tatami and bowing deeply. "I want to learn again, from the very basics of medicine, not for money or honor, but as a doctor whose sole purpose is to save the patient before him." Beside him, Mrs. Finch nodded repeatedly, her face stained with tears. She too had resolved to shed her false self and begin a true life. Sarah watched them, then quietly nodded. The revenge was over. And now, from here, the long and difficult path to regeneration for two souls was about to begin. 2 seasons had passed since the Finches left for a small village in northern England with only their minimal belongings. The dramatic acquisition of Finch General Hospital by BMH, which had shaken Britain, was gradually fading from public memory. The hospital, under the leadership of a new director, chosen by Sarah, a doctor committed to patient-centric care, was steadily on its path to recovery. The staff's expressions had brightened, and its reputation among local residents was growing daily. Meanwhile, a new light had also entered Ken's life. Through that series of events, he had transformed into a noticeably stronger and more confident young man. At work, his sincere character and strong will to overcome difficulties were highly praised, and he had been entrusted with leading major projects. There was no longer the wavering uncertainty in his eyes that had once been there. And by his side, there was a new partner. "Mum, let me introduce you. This is someone very special to me." One weekend, about half a year later, Ken, a little shyly, introduced a woman to Sarah. Her name was Lisa. She worked at the same company as Ken, an intelligent woman with a charming, sunny smile. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Hamilton. My name is Lisa." Lisa bowed deeply to Sarah, a hint of nervousness in her demeanor. "Ken has told me everything about you, and about the difficult experiences you went through." Sarah showed a hint of surprise at her words. She felt a sense of Ken's emotional growth, that he had confided his past wounds to her. "I truly respect you, Mrs. Hamilton, for raising Ken to be such an honest and admirable man, especially in such challenging circumstances as a single parent." There was no calculation or flattery in her words, only pure, heartfelt respect. Sarah instantly understood that this intelligent woman before her loved Ken, accepting all of him. "Thank you, Lisa. Ken is still a bit immature in many ways, but please take good care of him," Sarah said, smiling gently. Lisa's face brightened instantly. Beside her, Ken smiled with relief and pride. That scene was a moment of happiness for Sarah, more precious than anything else. Sarah received a letter from the Finches only once after that. It described, in simple yet sincere words, the hardships of rural life and days filled with a warmth they had never known before, and the joy of being useful to someone. Whether they had truly regenerated themselves, the answer to that would still be a long way off. But at least they were now walking, step by step, their own path towards atonement. Sarah no longer harbored hatred for them. The storm of revenge had passed, and in its wake lay a calm, clear blue sky. Her son had found true strength and a wonderful partner. The hospital had regained its rightful purpose, protecting the lives and health of many people. And she herself had been freed from the double life of a mother and a chairwoman, and now lived a peaceful, everyday life as just Sarah Hamilton. The story that began with that humiliating slap had changed the destinies of many and led each to their rightful place. Sarah watched her strong son's profile, more proud and loving than anything. The light of a new morning gently illuminated their future. After Ken and Lisa left, Sarah stood alone by the living room window. The twilight glow painted the town in a gentle orange hue. A year had passed since that humiliating incident. It felt both long and fleeting, as time flowed quietly. The story had begun with unreasonable violence and words that trampled on the heart. It should have been the prelude to a tragedy that could easily have led to a cycle of hatred and revenge. However, what filled Sarah's heart now was not anger or resentment, but a strange serenity and a deep sense of gratitude. Without this incident, Ken might still be averting his eyes from his own weakness, and she herself would have continued to hide her true self beneath the mask of the BMH chairwoman. That unjust humiliation had, in the end, strengthened the bond between her and her son like steel, and helped them both grow in a true sense. Nothing in life is wasted. Even painful experiences will always yield great fruit someday, she now believed with all her heart. She gently touched a small locket pendant that glowed quietly at her chest. Inside it was a photograph of her late husband, Thomas, in his youth. "Are you watching, my dear? Our son has grown so strong, and he has found a wonderful person. You don't need to worry about anything anymore. I will surely make him happy," she spoke to her husband in her heart. And as if in reply, a gentle breeze blew in from outside the window, softly caressing Sarah's cheek. A little later, a short message arrived from Ken. "Mom, thank you for today. Lisa was really happy to meet you too. Let's all go out for dinner together sometime." The happiness conveyed in the message unknowingly brought tears to Sarah's eyes. That night, Sarah and Ken took a walk around their neighborhood, something they hadn't done together in a long time. It was the same familiar path where they had often walked hand in hand when he was a child. The streetlights cast their silhouettes long on the asphalt. "Mum." Ken suddenly stopped, turning to Sarah with a serious expression. "Thank you. For standing up for me then, not just for revenge, but for helping me reclaim my lost dignity. I truly appreciate it. And thank you for teaching me, through your example, what true strength is." Sarah's heart warmed at his sincere words. She smiled a little shyly and shook her head. "No, it's I who should thank you, Ken." She gazed lovingly at her grown-up son's face. "It was because I had you, such a precious person to protect, that I could become so strong. Because you were there, I could face any difficulty. My source of strength was always you." Mother and son's gazes quietly met. Words were no longer necessary. A bond of absolute love and trust, thicker than blood, stronger than any power or wealth, firmly united them. They slowly began to walk again. The sky, now completely engulfed in twilight, shone with a beautiful full moon. It would be a lie to say there had been no hardship in being a single parent. But it was precisely because of that adversity that their bond had grown stronger and more beautiful than any other family's, Sarah was certain. This was the story of a mother and son who rose from the depths of despair. It was a record of love and regeneration, of winning justice and dignity with their own hands, without succumbing to unreasonable violence. And at its core flowed the eternal light of a parent-child bond, stronger and more beautiful than anything else.